An old favorite, an old friend, Religion Watch. The interesting article in Religion Watch this time is about, where was that? Paganism. Yeah, Orthodox disaffection spurs pagan and Lutheran revival in Russia's Volga region. The idea being that since many people in this part of Russia feel that the Orthodox Church sold out to the communist regime, that, as one of them says in the article, any faith is better than orthodoxy. In such Volga nations as Mordavia, Mari El, and Chuvashia. Now, I've never heard of Mari El. It's spelled like two words, M-A-R-I and then E-L. I've never heard of it. The others I've actually heard of. But in Mari El sounds like the most interesting of all. It says, Mari El may be the most pagan nation in Europe. According to a recent sociological survey, 5 to 7% of Mari El inhabitants are pure pagans. 60% are dual faith, both pagan and Russian Orthodox, and only 30% are Orthodox believers. Dual faith means that such believers attend Orthodox services without necessarily partaking of sacraments, while also visiting sacred groves and practicing pagan traditions.
That's a huge number.
Yeah. Of pagan scriptures is being completed, and public prayer services, including animal sacrifices, are drawing both native pagans and nationalists. Paganism could provide a common faith, blah, 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 creation of separatist-minded...
They don't say how many people, they just give those percentages.
No, they don't say actually how many people, but I suppose this is one of the, former autonomous regions of the Soviet Union or something. It's in the Volga, in the old central, Russian center of old Russia, but I've never heard of it before, so it's very strange. Anyway, that's the kind of thing you learn about when you get a subscription to Religion Watch, which is probably the zine I've been reviewing longer and more enthusiastically than any other. It's published monthly, except during July and August, by Richard P. Cimino, C-I-M-I-N-O, and Erling Jorstad for $19.95 a year, $19.95 a year. Mailing address, Box 652, North Belmore, one word, B-E-L-L-M-O-R-E, North Belmore, Box 652, North Belmore, New York 11710, 11710. The phone number, don't call now, wait till tomorrow, is 516-785-6765, 516-785-6765 for Religion Watch. Excellent. Now, let's have that one little song, and then I'll do my my big book review.
The shorter
one, feature
right?
review. Yeah, the short song.
Okay.
And what was it?
That's the British singer Bridget St. John, produced there by Ron Geeson, who some of you out there might know, a well-known, weirdo, eccentric British composer. And you were remarking, Peter, how it was maybe a little bit too bright and bouncy for you. Actually, pretty uncharacteristic for her. Her stuff is usually much sparser and sadder. That was unusually up arrangement. The other thing I wanted to mention, which I haven't told you about yet, and I thought I'd tell you on the air. I know you're a big fan of Karen Dalton, the singer Karen Dalton.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
She, a friend of mine actually from FMU, I guess I could say his name, Nick Hill, who does a great show on FMU, has gotten persuaded some folk label to reissue her two LPs on CD.
Were there two?
There were two, yeah.
Jack Collum, who gave me that stuff, told me as far as he knew there was only one.
No, there are two. They're both very, very hard to find. I mean, almost no one's heard this stuff. I think she has the most heartbreaking
voice I've ever heard from an American singer. There's some Irish singers who would compete.
Yeah.
But
well, Nick Hill from FMU knows a lot about her. I think he knew her personally.
Is that right?
Yeah, she died a few years ago, apparently. I think in '93. And he, I think Koch is the label, well-known folk label, is putting both of the records out on
you
CD.
know,
I'm not sure when, later this year sometime.
When you hear that that's been re-released, let's get it.
Sure, I want
to play
but
it.
But I mean, I share your
remastering
love
would
for
be interesting.
Yeah. Well, maybe some, previously unreleased stuff, whatever.
So moving, so incredibly.
Nick says
without
that
being the slightest bit sentimental, it's the most emotional American singing.
Nick has told me that literally every single time he plays her on his show, he gets phone calls.
I believe
every
it.
single time.
Yeah,
just
I believe it.
Always.
Like people saying, "What? How come
saying,
I never heard of
that?
it?"
Yeah,
how come I never heard of it?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway,
that was exactly my reaction when Jack played it. I said, "This is like world-class masterpiece. How come I never heard of this woman?"
Yeah.
And he said, "Well, she was an alcoholic. Her husband beat her. She couldn't do anything. She only brought out one album." And you can hear her voice is a fragile voice.
Nothing like it,
Yeah.
Anyway.
Okay, this is my big review for the my one big review for the evening. It's a book that I recently gave a couple of lectures at the Open Center on the history of money. And one of the people who attended those lectures came up to me afterwards and said, "Here, this is for you." I could never afford this book on my own, I'm sure. I can't even tell you how much it costs because it's, too classy to have a price in it. And I think, I don't know how this person got it, but I have a feeling he didn't actually pay for it either, so we just won't go into that. But anyway, it's called Before Writing, Volume 1, From Counting to Cuneiform, by Denise Schmandt-Besserat, with a foreword by William W. Hallow. It's published by University of Texas, is that right? Yeah, University of Texas at Austin, and it was published in 1992. The second volume apparently is only for specialists, and it has a complete list of all of these items which Denise Schmandt-Besserat, that's, by the way, SCHMAND-BESSERAT. I know that's a hard one. I'll repeat it for you in a minute. The items which she's discussing, which are little, completely, at first, boring-looking clay counters. Clay tokens is what she calls them. Now, the interesting thing about her thesis is that, well, first of all, these clay tokens have been showing up in archaeological digs ever since archaeology started, and usually they're totally ignored because what people were actually looking for until very, very recently, of course, was big things made out of gold, right, so they could impress their universities and museums. Now, in the last, let's say, 20, 30 years, a more scientific approach where everything that's found, which is an artifact, is recorded as to where it was found, in what context, in what in what part of the, in what stratum of the dig, what level of the dig it was found, what other things it would be in relation with, and so forth and so on. In the old days, these things, because they look like, some people thought they were maybe pieces for playing games. Other people didn't bother to even interpret them at all. And she is really the first person who's come up with a theory of these clay tokens. Other people have, of course, discussed them. There are a few precursors to her theory, but this is basically her theory and her work, and it is absolutely earth-shaking and fascinating. I haven't read such a important book in archaeology, I think, since maybe Marija Gimbutas' Civilization of the Goddess. And equally controversial, I would say, and I'm not even sure that I agree with it 100%, although in effect there's no arguing with her basic point. Now, the basic point is that these things were used as one-to-one counters for commodities. That is to say, certain of these clay tokens represented sheep, certain of them represented measures of grain, what have you. They start appearing in Near Eastern archaeology instantly as soon as agriculture appears. So from around 8,000 BC, we're talking here, these clay tokens, that's the first human use of clay as a technological substance. In other words, it precedes pottery and clay architecture. So technically, it's the beginning of the manipulation of clay. She also believes that it was necessary in order to make the economic shift from a hunter-gatherer society to an agricultural society, which involved redistribution on a much greater scale, redistribution of goods. So that basically she sees this as synonymous with the rise of the Neolithic in the Mideast. Then for 5,000 years, nothing happens. These tokens remain the same. For 5,000 years, the system of tokens remains the same. In every dig, you can go through layer after layer and find these little things, these boring little nothings, completely uninteresting looking little things. And they're in every layer, which shows that this system continued unchanged and unabated, that it spread over the entire Near East with exactly the same tokens symbolizing exactly the same commodities. Then around the fourth millennium, the tokens suddenly begin to become more complex. So instead of having triangles and squares and lozenges and a few simple basic geometric forms like that, suddenly there's hundreds of different varieties of them. There's lozenges with 3 lines. There's a lozenge with a puncture all the way through and 3 semi-punctures. There's a lozenge with a circle impressed in it. And so on and so forth. Infinite variety suddenly appears. It's quite clear that suddenly we're dealing with a much wider range of commodities. And these complex tokens, although they have been present in a small degree, suddenly take over the system in about the 4th millennium BC, which exactly coincides with what we know as the rise of the state. And here's where things really get interesting. In Sumer, ancient Sumer, in the city of Uruk, which was the first, which many archaeologists now look on as the first state in the modern sense of the word, with not only a king, but a bureaucracy and an administration and taxes and all of those good things. This development corresponds not with the invention of writing, not yet, but with a greater sophistication in the system of these clay tokens. Then, and this is amazing, she can pinpoint this. I mean, it's not through her work alone, but the archaeology can pinpoint the century in which writing appeared. It was 3100 BC. Isn't that amazing? And as soon as writing appears, the tokens disappear. And the earliest tablets that can be found have the same marks that were appearing on the tokens. They have the first pictographs, in other words, are not pictures of things. They're pictures of these tokens, which are already abstract and bear no pictographic relation. I mean, the fact that a triangle symbolizes grain has nothing to do with the shape of grain, presumably. Some of them do have something to do with the shape of the commodity. Others are just purely abstract signs. So some brilliant priest in the temple of Uruk in 3100 BC had the brilliant idea that instead of having to pile up all these clumsy little clay tokens in order to remember what business was being done by the temple, he could just take one flat slab of clay and impress certain signs into it. And this would be exactly the equivalent of the tokens. It took 5,000 years to figure that out. and so, all right, what the great contribution that Denise Schmandt-Besserat has made is that she has theorized, and here's where I don't necessarily totally agree with her, that writing does not begin with pictography, the way people thought until recently. Writing begins with counting, with, in fact, accounting. And I think she makes a very good argument for it. I think that in her enthusiasm for her theory, she may have gone a little bit far in throwing the pictographic theory of the origin of writing out the window. My own feeling at this point would be that pictography and accounting together somehow met in the mind of this unnamed and perhaps never nameable genius in the city of Uruk in Sumer in 3100 BC who invented writing as we know it. But once you've been through this volume, which by the way is clear, concise, I won't say it's brilliantly written, but it's certainly very well written. It's copiously illustrated, so you can come to your own conclusions about this sign system and the code system and so forth. And systematically, tirelessly, she just proves one point after another until you're convinced. I mean, when I opened this volume, I knew nothing about this. When I closed this volume, I was more or less completely convinced. As I say, since then, maybe I've rethought a few points, and I wouldn't necessarily agree. I also think that a lot more work has to be done before we can understand how this ties in with the origin of money, which I'm absolutely certain it does. And in fact, I'm going to have to write a letter to Professor Schmandt-Besserat and ask about certain questions, which I don't have time to go into right now. Well, basically, they used to put these tokens in clay envelopes, and then they would mark on the outside what was in they would put signs that were the equivalent of the tokens that were inside this envelope of clay. Actually, they look like round balls with seals on the outside. And it occurred to me that if the temple itself issued these envelopes with tokens inside them, it would be like the government issuing debt, which is what money is. Mm-hmm. The money is the government or the bank, which the government has given a monopoly to make money, promises to pay to the bearer on demand. So these things, these rather unwieldy, very inefficient items, they still could have been used as a kind of proto-money. In fact, even as real money, because the temple could just take this debt. Let's say if this means that Farmer Brown owes the temple 10 sheep, then the temple could take this record and use it to pay for something that was worth 10 sheep, right? On the expectation that Farmer Brown would eventually pay, and so forth and so on. So what you have here is the temple, the possibility of the temple issuing debt, which is exactly what money is. So what I need to find out from Professor Schmandt-Besserat is whether any of these envelopes can be proved to have been issued only with a temple seal on them, in which case we could suspect that this was not only the origin of writing, it was also the origin of money, which would make it even twice as important, and it's already, I think, incredibly important what she's done here. I think that if anybody cared about this stuff, this would be an immense controversy. For all I know, the Sunday New York Times or something has already covered this story. To me, it's news. And I can't tell you to go out and buy this book because it's obviously going to cost you, my guess would be $60, $70. But somehow or another, you should make yourself familiar with this thesis if you have any interest at all in the cognitive origins of symbolic systems and of communication systems, which includes, of course, not only writing, but also money, and therefore civilization as we know and presumably dislike it. And there's some great quotes in here from Levi-Strauss, for example, Claude Levi-Strauss, about how writing always involves an intensification of bureaucratic control, that writing basically is about control. That it's not this great liberating thing. Well, in one sense, it is the big liberation of progress, but that also means class system, hierarchy, priesthood, king, priest, and control. It means taxes, it means violence, it means exaction, expropriation, and so forth and so on. And by tying in the origin of writing with the accumulation of commodities in the temple, she makes this argument crystal clear. Crystal clear. This is an extremely important book. Let me just spell it out for you again. Her name, Denise, Schmandt, Besserat, Besserat, the name of the book, Before Writing, and the publisher, what did I say? University of Texas at Austin, right. So that's it for tonight, and we'll be back in 2 weeks, supposedly, if there's still a WBAI, and still in New York, still a world, and still us, and still you. We'll be back. And until then, I hope that you enjoy your life and read lots of interesting books. Write and tell me what you're reading. Make recommendations. Keep in touch. The address is Box 113, WBAI, 505 8th Avenue, 10018. We do encourage you to stay in touch and let us know what you think. We apologize for the being cut short by the news these past few months. This was not our idea of a good time, but what can we do? And we'll be back in 2 weeks. And what was the outro music you had chosen for us, Dave? Can you just quickly tell us?
Yeah, Arthur Russell.
Okay. So we're going to go out with some Arthur Russell music. We'll be back in 2 weeks, and until then, salam alaikum.